everyone, and welcome to part 2 of a 4-part series looking at defending assessment security in a digital world. We continue our conversation with Professor Phillip Dawson of Deakin University. Hello, Phill.
Hello, Chakwadi. Great to be here with you.
Oh, excellent. So last time we left off looking at e-cheating, and today we're going to delve a little bit into assessment security. And for anyone who's just joining us, this is also part of putting out word with regards to Phil Dawson's book on defending assessment security in a digital world. So Phil, my first question is, what is assessment security? Why is this important, especially now that we're in an era where we have more remote work and assessments have moved into remote learning?
Thanks for the question. So for a long time, we've been interested in academic integrity, which is a positive mission. It's a values-based mission. It's this idea that we want to develop in students the capability to do the right thing. And we know that that is linked with professional integrity in their later lives. So it's a wonderful thing. In the academic integrity conversation, things sometimes get a bit mixed up, where there's often, it's sort of that, but it's also sort of, and we've got to detect cheating, we've got to design assessments so it's harder to cheat and that sort of thing. In the book, I really try and separate off this other idea that's not part of that positive academic integrity mission into this concept of assessment security, which is, the measures that we take to make cheating harder, to detect cheating, to evidence attempts to cheat, all those sorts of things. During the sort of emergency learning that we've experienced recently due to the pandemic, but also the broader shift towards online learning, it's become more important that we focus on assessment security just because we're not there with students. We're not there to be sure to know that cheating's not occurring in those contexts. It's also the case that a lot of really predatory online businesses are there marketing cheating services to students, trying to make this a really appealing thing for them. So we need to sort of be there to counter that as well.
Oh, thanks for sharing your thoughts on what assessment security is, and also providing some ideas on why that is important. In your book, you talk about 2 key features educators should be aware of when considering assessment security. What are these 2 key features?
Okay, so we talk about 2 key features of authentication and control of circumstances. So authentication is about knowing who the student is, knowing that it's them that has produced the work. And it's in some senses similar to, authentication in general, where we're trying to know who's using a computer system or something. But it's also a little bit more specific, because we're wanting to know not just the person that's logged in right now is the person who's presenting to be them, but also say that they haven't paid someone else to write a piece of work for them. So that's the authentication problem. Control of circumstances is about in what conditions was a task undertaken. So a common case where control of circumstances comes up is in an exam. In an exam, we might say this is a closed book exam. So to ensure control of circumstances in a face-to-face exam, we might not let students bring certain materials into the exam. If, say, we're in an online environment, we might say, we're going to have some proctoring software on your computer, and that's going to stop you from being able to access other programs. So that's control of circumstances.
Excellent. So we're looking at control of circumstances and authentication. But now let's look at a case where an academic is starting afresh and looking at assessment design. What do they need to take into consideration while in terms of assessment security while designing their assessments?
Yeah, so when you're designing assessment security is one thing that factors into it, but it's not the only thing. Traditionally, we've thought about reliability and validity, those sorts of ideas that if we were to give someone the same task at different times, they'd achieve the same, or if we were to get different people to mark the piece of work, they'd come to the same result. That's sort of reliability. Validity is, are we assessing the thing that we think we're assessing? So these still really matter. So the first thing I'd say to assessment designers is make sure it's a reliable and valid task before you start even thinking about assessment security. After we've sort of moved beyond that, the basic concerns of assessment, I think we need to start looking for any obvious assessment security problems. Now, that might be if we're setting an exam and we allow the exam to be undertaken at different times by different people. That creates an obvious problem of sharing the content of the exam. So there's a long history of looking at those sorts of things. I think one of the challenges that we have with assessment security is the types of learning outcomes that we're assessing. When you're assessing something, you might be assessing, say, low-level outcomes around memorization and ability to recall certain facts, or you might be assessing higher-level outcomes around ability to sort of solve a problem or create some new critical analysis or even new knowledge. The assessment security concerns play out differently across those outcomes. So at the lower level, your assessment security focus should be on how can I stop people from accessing unauthorized information. At a higher level, your assessment security concerns are more around how can we evidence that the person did this work themselves and that they're being honest around their use of other materials, other sources, other people, technology, those sorts of things.
Nice. That's really exciting to hear. And I think with the nature of the current environment, a lot of people who are designing or rethinking assessment design, these are really crucial parts. I take your word in terms of the validity and reliability, which is crucial, and also thinking about the high level and the low level approaches. In your book, you also talk about approaches to improving assessment security. And I'm just going to throw in one thing here. While I was reading the book, I was trying to get a sense of, is there a role educators will play and is there a role students can play? So the question here is, what are some approaches to improving assessment security, and what role would an educator or student play in ensuring the security?
Yeah, so I think the first thing an educator needs to do is sort of try and understand what's my assessment security context where I am. So what tools might I have access to? And, in a lot of cases, that might include things like Turnitin's text matching or authorship type tools. What's my set of resources that I've got? So really try to understand those, to understand when they're appropriate, when they're not appropriate, make use of them. I think there's sort of a need to take a critical view of your assessment, to not make assumptions that your assessment's secure, but to actually try and break it, to try and cheat on it, to do some Googling, to look on various sites, check if your assessments are currently available up online. A lot of educators are really surprised when they Google and find that out. One thing I'd really love educators to do is to think about the restrictions that they place on students and question if all of those restrictions are necessary. So I talked about different levels of learning outcomes. If we are wanting to assess higher level learning outcomes, then perhaps we might not need restrictions around the access to particular resources. So say if we're setting an open book exam, that we might be assessing higher level outcomes and we're not setting restrictions around the use of notes and that sort of thing. So I really would love educators to question the restrictions that they set, because every restriction that you set in an assessment, every time you tell students you can't do this or I'll consider it cheating, you've got to enforce that, and that becomes really, really challenging. Now, students, on the other hand, around assessment security, it's an interesting question. I think students have a big role to play in promoting positive academic integrity. I think students also have a role to play in assessment security around letting us know when there are problems. Students become aware of these problems well before we become aware of them. So students need to tell us when there are problems, what their concerns are, what sorts of cheating they might know exists, and let us know. I'd also love us to get students to sometimes try to cheat for us and let us know, hey, try and cheat on this. Let me know what you think the problems are, what the possibilities are, and together we can try and make it so that that sort of cheating is not possible, because students hate cheating much more than anyone else in education.
All right. So you raised some really interesting points in terms of involving students in actually testing the security of an assessment. And I wonder if we'll get to a point where students are actually incentivized to do that, or if it's going to be an easy process to engage students in doing it. I don't know if we're actually setting them up to know the tricks. I don't know, but that's a different conversation for another day. So I think you've already alluded to this, but I thought I'll ask it. What are some challenges to assessment security?
So, in my view, the biggest challenge around the concept of assessment security is that it might lead us towards some very conservative assessment approaches. If we get too obsessed with assessment security, we might start to want everything to have an exam, every course unit to have an exam at the end of it. And I would hate that to be a result of increasing awareness around assessment security. So I think that's a really big concern. And then another concern is that some of the things that we do in the name of assessment security might communicate to students that we don't trust them. And I'd be really sad about that. We, by and large, do trust students, but there are times when, for reasons of public safety, for reasons of fairness, etc., we need to know for sure what somebody is capable of. And at those moments, we've got to ensure assessment security. So yeah, conservative assessment approaches and communicating a feeling of distrust to students are my biggest concerns about assessment security.
Oh, okay. That makes sense. I think that's actually a logical concern there. So we're going to look at what, in your book, you talk about the intention to secure assessment. So I just wanted to, I have a feeling it could be the same thing as like you explained earlier, but what are some things educators need to do when intending to secure their assessments?
So educators who want to secure their assessment, I think, should ask around their colleagues what they do to secure assessment. There's sort of not a universal approach that can work everywhere, but let's say you've got a colleague who is some sort of an expert in this sort of area or is renowned. Go to them, have a chat. In my other work, I've done a lot of work on how academics do assessment design. Really, talking to their colleagues is the most influential thing on most academics' assessment designs. And I guess just having that sort of dialogue with students around cheating, it's probably the most powerful thing that educators can do if they're intending on doing it. So ask students, what are the current issues in this space? What's the gossip around cheating at this place?
Yeah. Nice. Now, there's something that actually got me thinking. I actually thought authentication in cybersecurity would also be kind of similar to that in assessment security. So I've got this quote from your book, and I'm going to read it out. Assessment security has a harder authentication problem to solve than regular securities authentication problem. What does that mean?
Okay, so authentication, again, is that thing of knowing that the person is who they say they are. In sort of cybersecurity authentication, let's say I want to log into my bank. My bank wants to know that it's me, and I also want my bank to know that it's me. I don't want someone else pretending to be me. The assessment security problem is harder because the university wants to know that the student is who they say they are. But if you intend to cheat through, say, contract cheating, you don't want the university to know that the person representing you isn't that person. So it's a much harder problem. So things that we use in regular authentication in cybersecurity, like a username and a password, and maybe you get a text message on your phone, or you've got some app or something to authenticate you, those things just aren't enough. Because if I want you to pretend to be me, I will give you access to all of those things.
Okay, now that provides some clarity for me, because I wasn't sure. I just assumed authentication in cybersecurity could potentially apply in assessment security, but now I get the gamut of the challenge there. So my next question is around the challenges and constraints for security imposed by the context of assessment and security. What are some of these challenges and constraints?
So I think the biggest one is that as educators, we care so much about students. We want to maintain that wonderful relationship with them. We want to do things in an ethical way. We have a whole wealth of different legal and policy frameworks to operate within. So we can't do a lot of things that you might do if all you wanted to do was secure the task. We don't want to, do excessive surveillance on students. We can't sort of go out there and if we think someone's cheating, go and hack into their computer and try and, understand that, because that's obviously incredibly unethical. But all sorts of approaches like that are applied in other security contexts to sort of ensure security. So the ethical way that we want to operate is possibly one of the biggest challenges for assessment security. Yeah. However, I think those ethics are entirely a good thing.
All right, thanks for sharing that, Phil. Now, to wrap up, I enjoyed a bit of the book, and now I just want you to elaborate on the need to break up your assessment, auditing against features of assessment security, and finding out about what's assessment security technologies an institution has. Could you shed more light on that?
Yeah, so I think we often don't know the tools we have access to, or we don't know all the features of those tools. So I think a great first step people can do is ask their friendly learning designer or technologist, or even just colleagues, what have we got here? And actually going in and playing around with the different assessment security features that might exist in a tool. And that includes not just accepting the defaults on those tools, but really going in and customizing the settings for that balance between the sort of ethical respect of students, which is so important, and our need to ensure assessment security. You also mentioned just there breaking our assessment. Yeah, I think we do need to try and break it. In the world of cybersecurity, they do what's called penetration testing, which is where you maybe hire a third party to try and break into a computer system. We need to take those sorts of ideas and adapt them to education. This is kind of similar to some of the research we've done at Deakin, where we've paid some contract cheaters to produce assessments so that we can then see if our markers can detect those assessments, and then we can try and train our markers to better detect contract cheating. I'd love to do some more research studies where I actually engage with those professional cheaters and get them to try and break things. Because I think there are some things we'll only learn through sort of looking through the eyes of someone who's really good at cheating.
Sounds like some form of espionage there, and trying to work out how to break the internet. Oh, well, we've come to the end of today's episode, or the part 2 of a 4-part series looking at defending assessment security in a digital world with Dr. Phill. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at or exploring the artificial intelligence and assessment security a bit more. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Phill for being on the call today and talking to us about assessment security, and we're looking forward to the next our part 3 of our vidcast series.